Hey everybody! In this lesson I want to talk about one of my favorite songs, Red Clay by Freddie Hubbard. Freddie Hubbard recorded Red Clay on the album of the same name in 1970, and it's kind of this funky jazz rock tune. And it's interesting because the solo section is completely different from the rest of the song, and it's that solo section that I want to talk about today. It's just this 4-bar vamp that's really fun to play over, like this. So here's what it looks like. It starts out in the key of C minor, with a C minor 7 in the first bar. So you have C, E flat, G, and B flat. And then in the next two bars, it modulates to A flat major. So we have the 2 chord B flat minor 7, B flat, D flat, F, and A flat. And then we go to the 5 chord, E flat 7, which is E flat, G, B flat, and D flat. And then we land on the 1 chord in bar 3, A flat, major 7, A flat, C, E flat, and G. And then in the last bar, we modulate back to C minor with a 2-5 in the key of C minor. So we have a D minor 7 flat 5. So D, F, A flat, and C. And then we go to G dominant 7. And you can modify that G dominant 7 with like a sharp 5 or sharp 9 or a flat 9, any kind of alteration there. But we're just going to use the standard dominant chord right now. So G, B, D, and F. So it's a 4-bar vamp with an opening chord of C minor 7, then a 2-5-1 in A flat major, and then a minor 2-5 back to C minor. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I really like to play over this song. It's just like really soulful, and there's the constant switching between minor and major. Nothing really feels settled, but there's a lot of momentum. And I also really like the groove. It's very funky, with a little bit of rock, but you can still play jazz harmony over it. I just really love it. So we're going to look at how to convert these 4-note 7th chords into actually 2-note guide tone voicings. So we're going to take the 3rd and the 7th of each chord. Those are the guide tones because they tell you whether you have a dominant chord or a major 7th chord or a minor 7th chord. If you have a half diminished chord or a diminished chord, you're out of luck. With the 3rd and 7th, you need to look at the 5th as well. But for major, minor, and dominant, you can just use the 3rd and the 7th because the 5th and the root are exactly the same for those 3 types of chords. So we're going to look at the 3rd and the 7th of each of these chords. So for C minor 7, we have E flat and B flat. And then for B flat minor 7, we have, all set down, D flat and A flat. And then for E flat 7, we have G and D flat. So we actually have a common tone there from the last chord, which is that D flat. So if we go back to that B flat minor 7, and then keep the D flat where it is, and then lower the A flat to G, we have the guide tones for E flat 7. And this time the 7th is on the bottom. So you have 3-7, 3-7, 7-3, and then we go to A flat major, 3-7 again, so C and G. And then we're going to jump up to D minor 7 flat 5, but we're not playing the 5, so we just have to worry about our 3 and 7. So F minor third and C minor seventh. And then we have our G dominant, the 5 chord in C. So B and F. But we have another common tone here. F and C, B and F. So we're going to keep that F in the same place and lower the 7th down to B, and now we have the 7 and 3 of the G7 chord. So that leads us well into the C minor 7 guide tones. So here's the whole progression. Okay, so now that we've worked out those guide tones, let's actually take a moment to solidify them and look at each voice. So what that means is that we have 2 notes in the right hand in each chord, and if you treat each note like a separate instrument or a separate voice, you can track their movements, and that's really helpful when you're trying to learn a chord progression. So let's look at the top voice. So we start on B flat, and then we go to A flat, to G, stay on G, and then go up to C, and down to B, and then down to B flat. So like this. Just adding a little bit of rhythm. All right, now let's look at the bottom voice. So we start on E flat, and then we're going to go down a whole step to D flat, and stay on D flat, and then go down a half step to C. And then we're going to jump up a fourth to F, and we're going to stay there. And then we're going down a whole step to E flat again. So here's how it looks. And let's put them together. Alright, so let's talk about fingering. I like to start with 1 and 5 here, and then you can go to 1 and 4, 1 and 3, stay on 1 and 3, jump up to 1 and 5, 1 and 4, and then you can jump up to 1 and 5 here. Now, if you're doing that a little more quickly, you could land on 1 and 3, and then repeat with 1 and 5, or do a little finger switch where you're holding the B flat with your 3rd finger, and then kind of sliding over, holding down each finger in turn until you get to the 5th finger on top there. So that's the right hand. Now let's take a look at the left hand. So in the left hand, we're just playing roots. So we have C to start, then B flat, then E flat, then A flat, then D, and then G, and back to C. Now, it doesn't really matter which direction you go for these left-hand roots, as long as you stay sort of in the bass range. So you don't really want to go all the way up here. That's kind of your right-hand range, your chord range. So this is kind of the low bass range, that low E, and then this is kind of the high bass range right here, G below middle C. You could go up to here occasionally, but for the most part, you want to keep it a little lower. So we're going to start here. Go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, up. And again, it doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of improvising that. So you can pick whatever direction you want as long as you stay in that bass range. All right, so let's put it together one more time. 2, 3, 4. Now, I was noticing as I was playing, I probably used different fingering in the right hand than I talked about before. Fingering is really subjective, and I improvise it a lot of the time, and I also recommend just doing whatever is comfortable for you. So you don't want to have your wrist too angled or like this, or your hand too stretched out or too scrunched. Just be comfortable. That's my best advice for fingering. If it's easy and it's comfortable, you're probably using good fingering. If it seems like a struggle, you might want to look at the fingering, and maybe there's something you can do to make it easier. All right, so that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll do a little bit of review of what we learned in this lesson, and then we'll learn how to flip those guide tones around so that you're starting with the 7th in the right hand. All right, thanks for watching. See you next time.